The snow fell that December evening in a way that made the whole world feel hushed and sacred, each flake drifting down like a whispered secret from the heavens above. I was 8 years old, standing at the frosted window of our small apartment, my breath creating little clouds of warmth against the cold glass. The streetlights outside cast an amber glow through the swirling white, and I could hear the muffled sounds of car tires crunching slowly over the freshly fallen snow. The radiator beneath the window hissed and clanked, sending waves of dry heat up against my legs, but I barely noticed. My entire attention was fixed on the toy store across the street, its windows blazing with colored lights that seemed to pulse with magic and promise. Inside that store, displayed in the center window like a crown jewel, sat the most magnificent toy train set I had ever seen. It was not just any train. This was an entire miniature world, complete with a gleaming red locomotive that had real working headlights, passenger cars with tiny windows you could peer into, and a landscape of painted mountains, tunnels carved through papier-mâché hills, and a small village with houses no bigger than my fist. The train circled endlessly on its oval track, and even from across the street, even through the falling snow, I could see the little puff of artificial steam that rose from its smokestack. I had been watching that train for 3 weeks now, ever since the store owner, Mr. Kowalski, had set up his Christmas display. Every day after school, I would rush home, drop my backpack by the door where it would land with a heavy thud against the worn wooden floor, and run to that window. My mother would call out from the kitchen, her voice carrying the scent of whatever simple dinner she was preparing, usually something with onions and potatoes that made the whole apartment smell like comfort and warmth. She would remind me to hang up my coat, to take off my snowy boots, but I was already lost in my dreams, my forehead pressed against the cold glass, my hands cupped around my eyes to block out the reflection of our modest living room behind me. The train set cost $49.99. I knew this because I had crossed the street one afternoon, my heart hammering in my chest, and pushed open the heavy glass door of Kowalski's Toys. A small brass bell had chimed above my head, a cheerful tinkling sound that announced my presence. The store smelled like cardboard and new plastic, mixed with the pine scent of the small Christmas tree Mr. Kowalski kept near the register. The old man had looked up from his newspaper, his reading glasses perched on the end of his broad nose, and smiled at me with eyes that crinkled at the corners. I had not bought anything that day. I had simply walked through the narrow aisles, past shelves stacked with board games and dolls and building blocks, until I reached the window display. Up close, the train set was even more magnificent. I could see the tiny painted passengers visible through the windows of the cars, frozen in their miniature conversations. I could read the name painted on the side of the locomotive in gold letters, the Northern Star. There was a small printed card propped against the mountain, and on it, in Mr. Kowalski's careful handwriting, was the price. $49.99. I had exactly $7.32 saved in the old coffee can I kept under my bed. I had been saving for months, doing small jobs for neighbors, shoveling snow from sidewalks for a quarter here, 50 cents there, returning bottles for the deposit money. $7.32 felt like a fortune when I counted it out on my bedroom floor, the coins clinking together, the few wrinkled dollar bills smoothed flat with my careful hands. But it was nowhere near enough for the train set. That evening, as the snow continued to fall and the December darkness settled over our neighborhood like a heavy blanket, I finally turned away from the window. My mother was setting the table for dinner, and the sound of silverware clinking against our mismatched plates was familiar and soothing. She moved with a kind of tired grace, her shoulders slightly hunched from the long day she had spent cleaning houses across town. Her hands were red and rough from the cleaning solution she used, and I noticed she winced slightly as she gripped the handles of the serving dishes. We sat down to eat, just the two of us at our small kitchen table. My father had left when I was 5, and I barely remembered him now, just a vague impression of a tall figure and the smell of cigarette smoke. It had been just my mother and me for 3 years, and we had developed our own rhythms, our own small traditions. She served me a portion of the potato and onion casserole, steam rising from my plate and fogging up briefly before my face. The food was simple but filling, seasoned with paprika and a little bit of the precious butter she saved for special meals. "Mom," I said, my voice small in the quiet kitchen. The only other sounds were the scrape of our forks and the continued hissing of the radiator. She looked up at me, her brown eyes tired but attentive, always attentive when I spoke. "What is it, sweetheart?" she asked, and her voice was soft, like worn velvet. I hesitated, pushing a piece of potato around my plate. I knew we did not have much money. I knew my mother worked herself to exhaustion just to keep us fed and warm, to keep the rent paid on our small apartment. But the longing in my chest was so strong, so overwhelming, that I had to ask. I had to at least try. "That train set," I began, the words tumbling out now, "the one in Mr. Kowalski's window. I have been saving, and I have $7.32, but it costs $49.99, and I was wondering, maybe, if there was any way, for Christmas." I trailed off, watching her face. I saw something flicker in her eyes, a shadow of pain that she tried to hide behind a gentle smile. She reached across the table and took my hand in both of hers. Her skin was rough and warm, and she squeezed my fingers gently. "Oh, honey," she said, and I could hear the weight of the world in those 2 words. "That is a lot of money. I am working as much as I can, but with the rent due and the heating bill, and you need new shoes, I saw how your toes are pressing against the front of your sneakers." I felt my throat tighten, and I blinked hard against the tears that threatened to spill over. "I know," I whispered. "I know, Mom. It is okay. I should not have asked." But even as I said the words, even as I tried to be brave and understanding, the disappointment sat in my stomach like a stone, heavy and cold. She squeezed my hand again, harder this time. "I will try," she said, and her voice was fierce now, determined. "I will pick up extra shifts. Maybe I can clean the Hendersons' house twice a week instead of once. Maybe Mrs. Chen needs help with her holiday baking. I will try, baby. I cannot promise, but I will try." That night, lying in my narrow bed with the blankets pulled up to my chin, I listened to the sounds of the apartment settling around me. The old building creaked and groaned in the winter cold. Through the thin walls, I could hear the muffled sound of the television from the apartment next door, and somewhere above us, footsteps crossed back and forth across the floor. I could hear my mother in the kitchen, the sound of water running as she washed our dinner dishes, and then later, the soft rustle of papers as she sat at the table, probably going over bills by the light of the single lamp, her reading glasses perched on her nose just like Mr. Kowalski's, her lips moving silently as she added and subtracted, trying to make the numbers work. The days that followed seemed to crawl by with agonizing slowness. School became a blur of lessons I barely paid attention to. My teacher, Miss Patterson, a kind woman with gray hair always pinned in a neat bun, called on me twice to answer questions, and both times I had to admit I had not been listening. She gave me a concerned look but did not scold me. It was the week before Christmas break, and even the teachers seemed touched by the magic and distraction of the season. Every afternoon, I continued my vigil at the window. The train set continued its endless journey around the track, never tiring, never stopping. I began to memorize every detail. The way the light glinted off the brass bell mounted on the front of the locomotive. The tiny painted cow that stood in a field beside the track. The church with its white steeple that stood in the center of the village. I imagined myself small enough to live in that world, to walk the streets of that village, to wave at the train as it passed by. I saw my mother less and less during those days. She left early in the mornings, before the sun was up, and I would wake to find a bowl and a box of cereal set out for me on the kitchen counter, along with a note written on the back of an envelope. Have a good day at school. I love you. She would come home late, long after dark, her face drawn with exhaustion, her hands redder and more chapped than ever. She had taken on extra work, just as she had promised, and I felt a confusing mixture of gratitude and guilt every time I looked at her. One evening, about a week before Christmas, I was at my usual post by the window when I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. Mr. Kowalski was in his store window, and he was carefully removing the train set from its display. I watched, my breath caught in my throat, as he lifted the locomotive, then the cars, then began to dismantle the little village. No, I whispered, pressing my hands flat against the cold glass. No, no, no. Someone had bought it. Someone else had bought my train set. I felt tears streaming down my cheeks, hot against my cold skin. I had known, logically, that this might happen. The train set had been on display for weeks, and it was beautiful, desirable. Of course someone with enough money would eventually buy it. But knowing it logically did not make the pain any less sharp, any less real. I watched through blurred vision as Mr. Kowalski carefully packed each piece into a large cardboard box, his movements slow and methodical. When my mother came home that night, even later than usual, I was already in bed, pretending to be asleep. I heard her soft footsteps as she came to my doorway and stood there for a long moment. I kept my eyes closed, my breathing steady and deep, but inside I was churning with disappointment and sadness. I heard her sigh, a sound so weary and sad that it made my chest ache, and then she quietly closed my door and went to her own room. The next day at school, I could barely function. During recess, while the other children played in the snowy schoolyard, throwing snowballs and making snow angels, I sat alone on the cold metal steps leading up to the school entrance. My best friend, Tommy Rodriguez, came over and sat beside me, his breath making little clouds in the freezing air. "What is wrong?" he asked, bumping his shoulder against mine. "You have been weird all week." I shrugged, not trusting myself to speak without crying. Tommy was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Is it about Christmas? Are you worried about presents?" I nodded, still not speaking. Tommy was quiet again, and then he said something that surprised me. "My dad says Christmas is not really about the presents. He says it is about being together with people you love." I know that sounds like grown-up talk, but I think maybe he is right. Last year, we did not have much money either, and I did not get the bike I wanted, but we all made cookies together and played games, and it was still really good. I looked at Tommy then, really looked at him. He was smiling at me, his cheeks red from the cold, his knit cap pulled down over his ears. I tried to smile back, but it felt weak and unconvincing. "Thanks, Tommy," I said. "But it is hard to remember that when you really, really want something." He nodded, understanding in his dark eyes. "Yeah," he said. "I know. But hey, whatever happens, we can hang out over Christmas break. We can build a snow fort. That will be fun, right?" Yeah, I agreed, and this time my smile was a little more genuine. That will be fun. The bell rang then, a harsh clanging sound that echoed across the playground, and we trudged back inside, our boots leaving wet prints on the hallway floors. The days continued to pass, each one bringing Christmas closer. The apartment building where we lived began to fill with the smells and sounds of the holiday season. Mrs. Chen, who lived 2 doors down, was indeed doing holiday baking, and the scent of ginger and cinnamon would drift through the hallways, making my mouth water. The Kowalski family, no relation to the toy store owner, who lived upstairs, played Christmas music that thumped through our ceiling, cheerful and relentless. Even our landlord, Mr. Petrov, a usually grumpy man with a thick accent, had strung a few strands of colored lights along the railing of the front steps. My mother continued to work herself to exhaustion. I barely saw her. When I did, she looked thinner, more worn, but there was a determined set to her jaw that I recognized. She was fighting for something, working towards something, and I knew it was for me. The guilt I felt was almost overwhelming. I wished I had never asked for the train set. I wished I had been content with whatever small gift she could afford. But it was too late now. The wish had been spoken, and she was killing herself trying to make it come true. 3 days before Christmas, I came home from school to find my mother already there, sitting at the kitchen table. This was unusual. She was never home this early. For a moment, my heart leaped with hope. Maybe she had gotten off work early to go by the train set. But then I saw her face, and my hope died. She looked devastated, her eyes red as if she had been crying, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "Mom," I said, dropping my backpack and rushing to her side. "What is wrong? What happened?" She looked up at me, and I saw tears spill over and run down her cheeks. She reached out and pulled me into a fierce hug, holding me so tight I could barely breathe. "I am so sorry," she whispered into my hair. "I am so sorry, baby. I tried. I worked so hard. I picked up every extra shift I could. I have been saving every penny. But it is not enough. I got to $42, and I just cannot get any more before Christmas. I went to the toy store today to see if maybe Mr. Kowalski would hold it for me, let me pay the rest after Christmas, but he said someone already bought it last week. It is gone. I am so sorry." I felt my own tears start then, hot and fast, but they were not tears of disappointment anymore. They were tears of something else, something bigger and more complicated. I pulled back from her embrace and looked into her face, this face I loved more than anything in the world, this face that was lined with worry and exhaustion, all for me. "Mom," I said, my voice shaking. "Mom, it is okay. I do not need the train set. I do not need it. You have been working so hard, too hard. I just want you to rest. I just want you to be okay." She shook her head, more tears falling. "But you wanted it so much," she said. "I saw how you looked at it every day. I wanted to give you that joy. I wanted to give you something special. You deserve something special." I hugged her again, and we sat there at the kitchen table, holding each other and crying, while outside the December afternoon faded into evening and the streetlights flickered on one by one. When we finally pulled apart, we were both exhausted, wrung out, but there was also a kind of peace between us. An understanding. We would be okay. We had each other, and that was what mattered. That evening, we made dinner together, something we had not done in weeks. We made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup from a can, simple food that tasted like comfort and home. We ate slowly, talking about small things, school and neighbors, and the funny thing that had happened when Mrs. Chen's cat had gotten into her gingerbread dough. We laughed, and it felt good to laugh, like releasing pressure that had been building for too long. After dinner, my mother said, "I have an idea. Let us make our own Christmas special. We do not need expensive presents. We can make decorations. We can bake cookies. We can make this apartment feel like Christmas, just you and me. What do you say?" I nodded, feeling a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the radiator. "That sounds really good, Mom," I said. "That sounds perfect." We spent the next 2 days transforming our small apartment. We made paper snowflakes, cutting intricate patterns into folded white paper until our fingers were sore and the kitchen table was covered with tiny paper scraps. We strung popcorn on thread to make garlands, eating almost as much as we strung, laughing at our lack of self-control. My mother found an old box of ornaments in the back of the closet, decorations from when I was very small, and we hung them around the apartment, on the curtain rods and the lamp and the coat hooks by the door. We baked cookies using a recipe my mother remembered from her own childhood. The apartment filled with the smell of vanilla and sugar, warm and sweet and utterly perfect. We made simple sugar cookies, cutting them into shapes with the rim of a drinking glass since we had no cookie cutters. While they cooled on the counter, we made a glaze from powdered sugar and milk, tinting it with a few drops of food coloring we found in the back of the cupboard. We decorated the cookies with careful concentration, making swirls and dots and crooked stars. On Christmas Eve, my mother did not have to work. This was a miracle in itself. We spent the day together, just being together. We played cards at the kitchen table, simple games like Go Fish and Crazy Eights. We listened to Christmas carols on the old radio that sat on the counter, the music crackling with static but still beautiful. We looked out the window at the snow that had started falling again, big fat flakes that drifted down lazily, covering the world in fresh white. As evening approached, my mother said she needed to run a quick errand. She bundled up in her worn coat and her knit scarf, and she kissed the top of my head. "I will be back in less than an hour," she promised. "You stay warm. Maybe make us some hot chocolate for when I get back." I nodded, and she slipped out the door, the cold air rushing in briefly before she pulled it shut behind her. I went to the kitchen and found the tin of cocoa powder, mixed it with sugar and a little bit of milk to make a paste, then heated more milk in a pot on the stove, stirring constantly so it would not scorch. The smell of chocolate filled the kitchen, rich and comforting. My mother returned exactly when she said she would, her cheeks pink from the cold, snowflakes melting in her hair. She was carrying a small paper bag, and she had a mysterious smile on her face. "I made hot chocolate," I announced proudly, gesturing to the 2 mugs I had set out on the table, steam rising from them in delicate spirals. "Perfect," she said, setting down the bag and unwrapping her scarf. She sat down at the table and wrapped her cold hands around the warm mug, sighing with contentment. We sipped our hot chocolate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, and then she reached for the paper bag. "I got you something," she said. "It is not the train set. It is not anything close to the train set. But I wanted you to have something to open tomorrow morning." "Mom, you did not have to," I started, but she held up her hand. "I know I did not have to," she said. "But I wanted to. You are my son, and it is Christmas, and I love you more than anything in this world. So just accept it, okay?" I nodded, feeling my throat get tight again. "Okay," I whispered. She smiled and pulled a small wrapped package from the bag. It was wrapped in newspaper comics, the colorful panels making it cheerful if unconventional wrapping paper, and tied with a piece of red yarn. She set it on the table between us. "Tomorrow," she said firmly. "You open it tomorrow morning, not before." "I have something for you too," I said, suddenly remembering. "Wait here." I ran to my room and retrieved the gift I had made for her. I had used some of my saved money to buy a small picture frame at the thrift store, just $2, and I had drawn a picture to put inside it. It was not a very good drawing. I was 8, and my artistic skills were limited. But I had worked hard on it, spending hours with my colored pencils, trying to capture what I wanted to show her. It was a picture of the two of us, holding hands, with a big heart drawn around us. At the bottom, in my careful printing, I had written, "Best Mom in the World." I had wrapped it in some of the leftover newspaper comics, trying to fold the corners neatly the way I had seen her do. I brought it back to the kitchen and set it on the table next to her gift to me. "This is for you," I said, suddenly shy. "It is not much." She picked it up, her eyes already glistening with tears, and she held it gently, as if it were made of something precious and fragile. "Can I open it now?" she asked, and I nodded. She carefully unwrapped it, smoothing out the paper, and when she saw the framed drawing, she let out a small sob. "Oh, baby," she whispered. "Oh, sweetheart, this is beautiful. This is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me." She stood up and immediately found a place for it on the small shelf above the kitchen sink, right where she would see it every day. Then she came back and hugged me so tight I thought my ribs might crack, and we stood there in our small kitchen, holding each other while the Christmas carols played softly on the radio and the snow continued to fall outside. That night, I lay in bed, unable to sleep. It was Christmas Eve, and the magic of the night seemed to hum in the air around me. I could hear the building settling, the familiar creaks and groans. I could hear distant sounds of celebration from other apartments, laughter and music muffled by walls and distance. I thought about the train set, and I felt a pang of longing, but it was different now. Softer. Less sharp. I had wanted that train set so badly, had dreamed about it for weeks, but lying there in the dark, I realized that what I had was better. I had a mother who loved me enough to work herself to exhaustion trying to make me happy. I had a warm home and food to eat and someone who cared about me more than anything. That was worth more than any toy, no matter how magnificent. I must have eventually fallen asleep, because I woke to pale winter sunlight filtering through my curtains and the sound of my mother moving around in the kitchen. I could smell coffee brewing and something else, something sweet. I climbed out of bed, my feet cold on the floor, and padded out to the kitchen in my pajamas. "Merry Christmas," my mother said, turning from the stove with a smile. She was making French toast, a special treat, the bread sizzling in the pan and filling the air with the scent of cinnamon and vanilla. "Merry Christmas, Mom," I replied, and I went to her and hugged her, feeling the warmth of her through her old bathrobe. After breakfast, we sat at the table, and she pushed the small wrapped package toward me. "Go ahead," she said, her eyes bright with anticipation and a little bit of nervousness. I picked it up, feeling the weight of it, trying to guess what might be inside. I carefully untied the red yarn and unfolded the newspaper comics, revealing a small cardboard box. Inside the box, nestled in tissue paper, was a wooden train engine. It was not the magnificent electric train from Mr. Kowalski's window. It was much simpler, carved from wood and painted by hand. The paint job was a little uneven, the red not quite staying inside the lines, and it had no lights, no moving parts, no track to run on. But as I lifted it out of the box and held it in my hands, feeling the smooth wood and the careful craftsmanship, I felt something swell in my chest. "I made it," my mother said softly. "I know it is not what you wanted. I know it is nothing like that fancy train set. But I was at the Henderson's house last week, and Mr. Henderson has a workshop in his garage, and he saw me looking at his tools, and I told him about the train you wanted, and he offered to help me make something. We worked on it together during my lunch breaks. He did most of the carving, but I did the painting. I wanted you to have a train, even if it could not be the one you dreamed about." I looked up at her, and I saw the vulnerability in her face, the fear that I would be disappointed, that this simple handmade toy would not be enough. But in that moment, holding that wooden train, I understood something profound. This train, this simple carved and painted piece of wood, represented hours of work, hours stolen from her precious little free time. It represented her love, her determination, her refusal to let me down even when circumstances were against her. This train was worth more than 1,000 electric trains from a store window. "Mom," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Mom, this is perfect. This is the best present I have ever gotten. I love it. I love it so much. And I love you." She started crying then, tears of relief and joy streaming down her face, and I was crying too, and we were both laughing at the same time, at the absurdity and beauty of it all. I spent the rest of that Christmas morning playing with my wooden train, pushing it across the kitchen table, making train sounds with my mouth, creating elaborate stories about where it was going and who was riding in it. My mother watched me with a smile on her face, sipping her coffee, and I could see the tension that had been in her shoulders for weeks finally beginning to ease. In the afternoon, Tommy came over, as we had planned. He brought a deck of cards his grandmother had given him, and we played games while my mother made more hot chocolate. Tommy admired my wooden train, turning it over in his hands and declaring it really cool. He did not ask about the electric train from the store window. He did not need to. He understood, in the way that good friends do, that this was better. As the short winter day faded into evening, and Tommy went home to his own family, my mother and I sat together on our old couch, a blanket draped over both of us, listening to the radio. The apartment was warm and cozy, decorated with our handmade snowflakes and popcorn garlands. The cookies we had baked sat on a plate on the coffee table, and we nibbled on them while we listened to a reading of A Christmas Carol, the narrator's voice dramatic and engaging. I held my wooden train in my lap, running my fingers over the smooth wood, tracing the painted lines. I thought about the electric train, probably sitting in some other child's house right now, running on its track, lights blazing. I wondered if that child appreciated it, if they understood how lucky they were. But the wondering was not bitter. It was just curiosity, distant and detached. Because I had something better. I had this train, made with love and sacrifice. I had this moment, warm and safe with my mother beside me. I had the knowledge, deep and certain, that I was loved beyond measure. These were gifts that could not be bought in any store, could not be displayed in any window. These were the gifts that mattered. The years passed, as years do. I grew up, went to high school, then college. My mother continued to work hard, but as I got older, I was able to help more. I got part-time jobs, contributed to the household expenses, made sure she did not have to carry the burden alone anymore. We moved to a slightly bigger apartment, then eventually to a small house with a yard. Life got easier, bit by bit. But through all those years, through all the changes and challenges, I kept that wooden train. It sat on my bookshelf in my bedroom, then later on my desk in my college dorm room, then on a shelf in my first apartment. I kept it not because it was valuable or impressive, but because it represented something essential. It represented a Christmas when I learned what really mattered. It represented my mother's love, tangible and real, carved into wood and painted with her own hands. When I was 25, I got engaged to a wonderful woman named Sarah. We were planning our wedding, talking about our future, and one evening, as we sat in my apartment going through old photos and mementos, she picked up the wooden train from its place on the shelf. "What is this?" she asked, turning it over in her hands with a curious smile. "It is not quite your style for decoration." I took it from her gently and held it, feeling the familiar weight and texture. "This," I said, "is the most important gift I ever received." And I told her the story. I told her about being 8 years old and wanting the electric train set more than anything. I told her about my mother working herself to exhaustion, about the disappointment and the tears, about the Christmas Eve when we made hot chocolate and decorated cookies. I told her about opening this simple wooden train on Christmas morning and understanding, really understanding, what love looked like. Sarah listened with tears in her eyes, and when I finished, she took my hand and squeezed it. "That is beautiful," she whispered. "Your mother sounds like an amazing woman." "She is," I agreed. "She really is." Sarah looked at the train again, then back at me. "You know what I love about this story," she said. "It is not really about the train at all. It is about recognizing what you have instead of mourning what you do not have. It is about gratitude and love and sacrifice. Those are the things I want in our marriage. Those are the values I want to teach our children someday." I kissed her then, feeling a rush of love and certainty. I had chosen well. We would build a good life together, a life based on the lessons I had learned that long ago Christmas. We were married the following spring, and my mother stood beside me, proud and beaming, wearing a new dress we had bought for her, her hands no longer quite so red and rough now that she had retired from cleaning houses and was working part-time at a library, a job she loved. Sarah and I had 3 children over the years. 2 boys and a girl. We made sure they had good Christmases, with presents and traditions and all the magic we could muster. But we also made sure they understood that the presents were not the point. We told them stories, including the story of the wooden train. We taught them about gratitude and sacrifice and love. We made sure they knew that the best gifts were not the ones that came in fancy packages, but the ones that came from the heart. When my mother passed away, I was 42 years old. She had lived a good long life, had seen her grandchildren grow, had finally gotten to rest and enjoy her later years. But losing her was still the hardest thing I had ever experienced. At her funeral, I spoke about her strength, her determination, her boundless love. I told the story of the wooden train, my voice breaking as I described how she had worked with Mr. Henderson in his garage, learning to use tools she had never touched before. Also, I could have a train on Christmas morning. After the funeral, after the reception, after all the well-wishers had gone home, I sat alone in my childhood home, the small house we had moved to when I was in high school. I was going through her things, a painful but necessary task, and I found a box in the back of her closet. Inside were mementos she had saved over the years. My old report cards. Drawings I had made in elementary school. Photos of the 2 of us at various ages. And at the bottom of the box, carefully wrapped in tissue paper, was the drawing I had given her that Christmas when I was 8. The frame was worn now, the glass slightly scratched, but the drawing was still there, my childish printing declaring her the best mom in the world. I held it and wept, great heaving sobs that came from the deepest part of my soul. She had kept it all these years. She had treasured it, just as I had treasured the wooden train. We had both understood, even back then, what really mattered. I took the framed drawing home with me, and I put it on my own shelf, right next to the wooden train. They belonged together, these two simple handmade gifts, these symbols of a love that had shaped my entire life. Now I am 53 years old. My children are grown, starting their own lives, making their own way in the world. Sarah and I are talking about becoming grandparents soon, a prospect that fills me with joy and a little bit of terror. The wooden train still sits on my shelf, a little more worn now, the paint faded in places, but still solid, still beautiful in its simplicity. Every Christmas, I take it down and hold it, remembering. I remember being 8 years old and wanting something I could not have. I remember my mother's tears and her determination. I remember the smell of hot chocolate and sugar cookies. I remember the feeling of opening that simple gift and understanding, truly understanding, what love looked like. I remember all of it, and I am grateful. Because that Christmas, that difficult, beautiful Christmas when I was 8 years old, taught me the most important lesson of my life. It taught me that the best gifts are not the ones we buy, but the ones we make, the ones we sacrifice for, the ones we give from our hearts. It taught me that love is not about grand gestures or expensive presents, but about showing up, day after day, doing the hard work, making the sacrifices, being there. It taught me that what we have is always more important than what we lack, if only we have the wisdom to see it. I never got that electric train set from Mr. Kowalski's window. I never rode the Northern Star around its oval track, never walked the streets of that miniature village, never lived in that perfect little world. But I got something so much better. I got a mother who loved me enough to work her fingers raw. I got a wooden train carved with care and painted with love. I got a lesson in gratitude and sacrifice that shaped the man I became. I got a story I would tell for the rest of my life, a story that would teach my children and, someday, my grandchildren, what really matters. The toy I never got taught me more than any toy I ever received. And the gift I did not know I needed, the gift of understanding and gratitude and love, turned out to be the greatest gift of all. That Christmas, when I was 8 years old, standing at the window watching snow fall on a toy store across the street, I thought I knew what I wanted. I thought I knew what would make me happy. But I was wrong. What made me happy, what sustained me through all the years that followed, was not a thing at all. It was a person. It was my mother, and her love, and the sacrifices she made without hesitation, without complaint, simply because I was her son and she loved me. Every year, as Christmas approaches, I see children pressing their faces against store windows, their eyes wide with longing, their hearts full of wishes. I see parents struggling to make ends meet, working extra hours, sacrificing their own needs to try to give their children something special. I see the stress and the worry and the fear that they will not be enough, that they will disappoint, that their love will not be sufficient without the perfect present to prove it. And I want to tell them all, every single one of them, what I learned when I was 8 years old. I want to tell them that the presents do not matter, not really. I want to tell them that years from now, their children will not remember the specific toys they received, but they will remember the feeling of being loved. They will remember the warmth of home and the smell of cookies baking and the sound of their parents' voice reading them a story. They will remember the sacrifices made on their behalf, the extra shifts worked, the tired smiles, the hands rough from labor but gentle in affection. I want to tell them that the greatest gift they can give is not something that comes from a store, but something that comes from the heart. time and attention and presence, sacrifice and effort and love. These are the things that matter. These are the things that last. A toy will break or be outgrown or forgotten, but the memory of love, the knowledge that someone cared enough to try, to work, to sacrifice, that lasts forever. That shapes a life. That becomes the foundation on which everything else is built. I think about Mr. Kowalski sometimes, the toy store owner who displayed that magnificent train set in his window all those years ago. I wonder if he knew the impact that train would have, not because I got it, but because I did not. I wonder if he understood that sometimes the things we long for but do not receive teach us more than the things we get. I wonder if he is still alive, still running his store, still creating window displays that capture the imagination of children passing by. I think about Mr. Henderson, the man who helped my mother make the wooden train. I never properly thanked him. I was 8, and I did not understand the full significance of what he had done. He had given up his lunch breaks to help a struggling single mother make something special for her son. He had shared his tools and his skills and his time, asking nothing in return. That was a gift too, a gift of kindness and generosity that made my Christmas possible. I wish I could find him now and tell him what that train meant to me, how I have kept it all these years, how it taught me lessons that shaped my entire life. I wish I could tell him that his kindness mattered, that it rippled out in ways he probably never imagined. I think about Tommy Rodriguez, my childhood friend who sat with me on those cold school steps and reminded me that Christmas was about more than presents. I wonder where he is now, what kind of life he built, whether he remembers that conversation. I wonder if he knows that his simple words of comfort helped me through one of the hardest moments of my young life. Friendship is a gift too, I have learned. The gift of someone who sees you struggling and sits beside you, who offers comfort without judgment, who reminds you of what matters. Tommy gave me that gift, and I have tried to pass it on, to be that kind of friend to others when they need it. I think about all the people who touched that Christmas, who played a part in the story, who contributed in ways large and small to the lesson I learned. Mrs. Chen with her gingerbread and her kindness. Miss Patterson, my teacher, who saw my distraction and did not scold but showed patience. The neighbors in our building who created a sense of community with their music and their lights and their holiday cheer. Even Mr. Petrov, our grumpy landlord, who strung those lights on the front steps and showed that even the most unlikely people can be touched by the spirit of the season. All of these people, all of these small moments and interactions, they all contributed to making that Christmas what it was. They all played a part in teaching me what I needed to learn. Life is not lived in isolation. We are all connected, all part of a larger web of relationships and interactions. The gifts we give and receive are not just physical objects, but moments of connection, acts of kindness, words of comfort, gestures of love. These are the things that make life rich and meaningful. These are the things that matter. As I sit here now, in my comfortable home, with my loving wife beside me and my grown children living their own lives, I am filled with gratitude. Gratitude for that long ago Christmas when I learned what really mattered. Gratitude for my mother, who loved me so fiercely and taught me so much. Gratitude for all the people who touched my life and shaped who I became. Gratitude for the struggles and the disappointments, because they taught me resilience and perspective. Gratitude for the simple wooden train that sits on my shelf, a constant reminder of love and sacrifice. I have had many Christmases since that one when I was 8 years old. Some have been joyful and abundant. Some have been difficult and lean. But none have been as important, as formative, as that one Christmas when I did not get what I wanted but received what I needed. That Christmas taught me to look beyond the surface, to value the intangible, to recognize love in all its forms. It taught me that the best gifts cannot be wrapped or placed under a tree. They are given in moments of sacrifice and effort, and time spent together, in words of encouragement, and acts of service, and the simple presence of someone who cares. Now, as I approach the later years of my life, I find myself thinking more and more about legacy. What will I leave behind? What will my children and grandchildren remember about me? I hope they will remember that I loved them. I hope they will remember that I was present, that I showed up, that I made sacrifices on their behalf. I hope they will remember the stories I told, including this one, the story of the toy I never got and the gift I did not know I needed. I hope they will understand that life is not about accumulating things, but about cultivating relationships. It is not about getting everything you want, but about appreciating everything you have. It is not about grand gestures, but about small, consistent acts of love. These are the lessons my mother taught me, not through lectures or sermons, but through her life, through her choices, through her sacrifices. These are the lessons I have tried to pass on to my own children. These are the lessons I hope will continue, generation after generation, long after I am gone. The wooden train will be passed down, I have decided. When I die, it will go to my oldest son, and I have written a letter to accompany it, telling the full story of that Christmas, explaining what it means, why it matters. I have asked him to keep it, to treasure it, and someday to pass it on to his own children, along with the story. I want this simple carved and painted piece of wood to become a family heirloom, not because it is valuable in any monetary sense, but because it represents something essential about who we are as a family. It represents love and sacrifice and gratitude. It represents the understanding that the best things in life cannot be bought. It represents the lesson that what we have is always enough, if only we have the wisdom to see it. Christmas is coming again soon. The stores are already decorated, their windows full of enticing displays. Children are already making their lists, their eyes wide with anticipation. Parents are already worrying about budgets and presents and whether they can afford to give their children what they want. The cycle continues, year after year, generation after generation. And in the midst of all the commercialism and stress and worry, the true meaning of Christmas can sometimes get lost. But I remember what Christmas is really about. It is about love made manifest. It is about sacrifice and generosity and kindness. It is about recognizing the gifts we have been given, the people who love us, the moments of connection and joy that make life worth living. It is about being grateful for what we have instead of mourning what we lack. It is about understanding that the best gifts are not things at all, but the intangible treasures of relationship and love. That Christmas when I was 8 years old, standing at the window watching snow fall on a toy store across the street, I thought my heart would break from wanting. I thought that train set was the key to happiness, the answer to all my dreams. I thought that if I could just have that one thing, everything would be perfect. But I was wrong. Happiness was not in that store window. It was right behind me, in the small warm apartment where my mother was working herself to exhaustion out of love for me. It was in the simple meals we shared, the conversations we had, the moments of connection and understanding. It was in the handmade decorations and the cookies we baked together. It was in the wooden train she made with her own hands, pouring her love into every carved line and painted surface. The toy I never got taught me more than any toy I ever received. It taught me about disappointment and resilience. It taught me about perspective and gratitude. It taught me to look beyond the surface, to value the intangible, to recognize love in all its forms. It taught me that what we want is not always what we need, and that sometimes not getting what we want is the greatest gift of all, because it opens our eyes to what we already have. The gift I did not know I needed was the gift of understanding. Understanding that love is not measured in dollars and cents, but in time and effort and sacrifice. Understanding that the best gifts come from the heart, not from a store. Understanding that what makes life rich and meaningful is not what we own, but who we love and who loves us in return. Understanding that gratitude is not just a feeling, but a way of seeing the world, a lens through which everything becomes more beautiful and precious. My mother gave me that gift, that Christmas when I was 8. She gave it to me not by buying me what I wanted, but by showing me what I had. She gave it to me through her tears and her determination, through her rough hands and her tired smile, through the wooden train she made when she could not afford to buy the one I dreamed of. She gave it to me through her presence and her love and her unwavering commitment to my happiness and well-being. She gave me everything that mattered, and in doing so, she taught me to see what really matters. I carry that lesson with me every day. When I am tempted to focus on what I lack, I remember that Christmas and I shift my focus to what I have. When I am tempted to measure my worth or my success by material standards, I remember that wooden train and I remember what really matters. When I am tempted to take the easy path, to avoid sacrifice, to put my own comfort above the needs of those I love, I remember my mother working extra shifts and learning to use tools she had never touched before, all for me, and I find the strength to do what needs to be done. This is the legacy she left me. Not money or property or material wealth, though she worked hard to provide what she could. The legacy she left me was this understanding, this perspective, this way of seeing the world. She taught me that love is action, not just feeling. She taught me that sacrifice is not a burden, but a privilege. She taught me that the best gifts are the ones we make ourselves, pouring our time and effort and love into them. She taught me that what we have is always enough, if only we have the wisdom to see it and the gratitude to appreciate it. And now, as I hold that wooden train in my hands, feeling the smooth wood worn even smoother by decades of handling, seeing the paint faded but still visible, I am transported back to that Christmas morning when I was 8 years old. I can smell the French toast cooking on the stove. I can hear the Christmas carols crackling on the old radio. I can see my mother's face, anxious and hopeful, as she watched me unwrap her gift. I can feel the moment of understanding that washed over me, the realization that this simple handmade toy was worth more than any store-bought treasure. That moment changed me. It set me on a path that has defined my entire life. It taught me to value people over things, experiences over possessions, love over luxury. It taught me to be grateful for what I have instead of resentful about what I lack. It taught me to see the extraordinary in the ordinary, the sacred in the simple, the profound in the everyday. It taught me that the best life is not the one with the most stuff, but the one with the most love, the most connection, the most meaning. I have tried to live by these lessons. I have tried to be the kind of person my mother was, the kind of person who shows love through action, who makes sacrifices without complaint, who values relationships above all else. I have tried to teach my children what she taught me, not through lectures, but through example, through the choices I make, through the way I live my life. I have tried to pass on the legacy she gave me, the understanding that what really matters cannot be bought or sold, but must be cultivated and nurtured and protected. Have I always succeeded? No. I am human, flawed, and imperfect. There have been times when I have lost sight of what matters, when I have been caught up in the pursuit of things that do not truly satisfy, when I have prioritized the wrong things. But always, I come back to that wooden train. I pick it up, I hold it, I remember, and I am reoriented. I am reminded of what is true and real and important. I am reminded of my mother's love and the lessons she taught me. I am reminded of who I want to be and what kind of life I want to live. This is the power of that Christmas, that long ago Christmas when I was 8 years old. It continues to shape me, to guide me, to teach me, even now, decades later. It is a touchstone, a reference point, a North Star by which I navigate my life. When I am lost or confused or overwhelmed, I return to it. I remember standing at that window, longing for something I could not have. I remember my mother's tears and her determination. I remember opening that wooden train and understanding, truly understanding, what love looked like. And I am found again. I am reoriented. I know what matters. So as Christmas approaches once again, as the stores fill with shoppers and the streets fill with lights and the air fills with music and anticipation, I hold my wooden train and I remember. I remember what Christmas is really about. I remember what really matters. And I am grateful. Grateful for that long ago Christmas when I did not get what I wanted but received what I needed. Grateful for my mother and her love and her sacrifices. Grateful for the lesson that has shaped my entire life. Grateful for the understanding that the best gifts are not the ones we buy, but the ones we make, the ones we give from our hearts, the ones that carry our love and our sacrifice and our commitment to those we care about. The toy I never got sits in someone else's attic now, probably, forgotten and dusty, its batteries long dead, its magic faded. Or perhaps it was thrown away years ago, discarded when it broke or when the child who received it grew too old for toys. It does not matter. That train, magnificent as it was just a thing. It could break, it could be lost, it could be forgotten. But the wooden train my mother made for me, that simple carved and painted piece of wood, that will last forever. Not the physical object, though I have cared for it well and it remains solid and beautiful in its simplicity. But the meaning it carries, the lesson it represents, the love it embodies, that will last forever. That will be passed down through generations. That will continue to teach and inspire and remind long after I am gone. This is the true gift of that Christmas. Not the wooden train itself, though I treasure it, but the understanding it represents, the lesson it teaches, the love it embodies. This is what my mother gave me that Christmas morning when I was 8 years old. This is what I have tried to pass on to my own children. This is what I hope will continue, generation after generation, a legacy not of things, but of understanding, of perspective, of love. The snow is falling again tonight, just as it did that December evening so many years ago. I stand at my window, just as I did then, watching the flakes drift down through the amber glow of the streetlights. But I am not looking across the street at a toy store window anymore. I am not longing for something I cannot have. Instead, I am looking at my own reflection in the glass, and behind it, the warm glow of my home, where Sarah is reading by the fire and the smell of dinner cooking fills the air. I am looking at what I have, and I am grateful. I turn away from the window and walk to the shelf where the wooden train sits. I pick it up, feeling its familiar weight, running my fingers over the smooth wood and the faded paint. I think about my mother, gone now these many years, but still present in this simple object she made with her own hands. I think about the love she poured into it, the sacrifice it represents, the lesson it teaches. I think about how this one small thing has shaped my entire life, has taught me what matters, has made me who I am. And I whisper into the quiet room, "Thank you, Mom. Thank you for the toy I never got, because it taught me to appreciate what I had." Thank you for the gift I did not know I needed, the gift of understanding and gratitude and love. Thank you for working so hard, for sacrificing so much, for loving me so completely. Thank you for teaching me what really matters. Thank you for everything. The wooden train sits silent in my hands, but I can almost hear my mother's voice, soft and warm, saying what she always said. I love you, sweetheart. I love you more than anything in this world. And I know, with absolute certainty, that this is true. She did love me more than anything. She showed me that love every single day, in 1,000 small ways, but never more clearly than that Christmas when I was 8 years old, when she gave me a simple wooden train and taught me the most important lesson of my life. The best gifts, I have learned, are not the ones that fulfill our wants, but the ones that meet our needs, even when we do not know what those needs are. The best gifts are not the ones that dazzle and impress, but the ones that teach and transform. The best gifts are not the ones that come from stores, but the ones that come from hearts. The best gifts are not things at all, but moments of understanding, lessons learned, love given and received. That Christmas when I was 8 years old, I wanted a toy train. What I got was so much more. I got a lesson in love and sacrifice. I got an understanding of what really matters. I got a perspective that has guided me through my entire life. I got a mother's love, made tangible in a simple wooden train, made real in her tears and her determination and her willingness to do whatever it took to make me happy. I got everything that mattered, even though I did not get what I wanted. This is the paradox of that Christmas, the beautiful contradiction at its heart. I did not get what I wanted, but I got what I needed. I was disappointed, but I was also enlightened. I felt loss, but I gained understanding. I did not receive the toy I longed for, but I received a gift far more valuable, a gift that has enriched my entire life, a gift that I will carry with me until my last breath and beyond, passed down through my children to their children, a legacy of love and understanding and gratitude. The toy I never got taught me everything I needed to know. And the gift I did not know I needed turned out to be the greatest gift of all. This is the story of that Christmas, the Christmas that changed my life, the Christmas that taught me what really matters. This is the story I tell every year, to my children and now to my grandchildren, to anyone who will listen. This is the story that keeps my mother's memory alive, that honors her sacrifice, that passes on the lesson she taught me. And as I stand here now, holding this wooden train, feeling the weight of memory and meaning it carries, I am filled with a peace that surpasses understanding. I am filled with gratitude for the life I have lived, for the lessons I have learned, for the love I have known. I am filled with hope for the future, hope that the lessons my mother taught me will continue to ripple out, touching lives I will never know, making the world a little bit better, a little bit kinder, a little bit more focused on what really matters. This is my Christmas story. This is the story of the toy I never got and the gift I did not know I needed. This is the story of a mother's love and a child's understanding. This is the story of sacrifice and gratitude and the true meaning of Christmas. This is the story that has shaped my life and that I hope will shape the lives of those who come after me. This is the story I will tell until I can tell it no more, and then it will be told by others, passed down through generations, a legacy of love that will never die. The wooden train sits on my shelf, a simple object that carries the weight of a lifetime of meaning. It is not valuable in any monetary sense. It would fetch nothing at an auction, would be passed over at a garage sale. But to me, it is priceless. It is the physical embodiment of my mother's love. It is the tangible reminder of the most important lesson I ever learned. It is the symbol of everything that matters in this life. It is, quite simply, the most precious thing I own. And so, as Christmas comes once again, as the world fills with the rush and stress and commercialism of the season, I hold my wooden train and I remember. I remember what Christmas is really about. I remember what really matters. I remember my mother and her love and her sacrifice. I remember being 8 years old and learning the most important lesson of my life. I remember, and I am grateful, and I am at peace.